Greetings, greetings, greetings. Today's read will be a continuation of the reading of a BLisB song, a novel by Djeli Clark. And we're at the point in the story where the Harvest Festival was going hard. And BLisB had just discovered a bit of what goes on during rituals for when girls are led into womanhood, the beginning of womanhood. And we hear about her crush on Ikolo, and we hear about the rivalry between her best friend Fomi and a girl she doesn't really like that much, but they don't really argue. She just kind of ignores her, Sowoki, because Sowoki's father travels outside of the forest, and she has access to things that are bigger than their world. So she feels like, like general teenage stuff, right? But in a African forest village context, because prior to invaders, colonizers, those who would steal away, destroy, ravage villages like BLisB's village for resources, the village had a full life, traditional life, and not just this one village. The continent of Africa is beautifully rich in natural resources, and the people who live in those areas that are not easily accessible have their own traditions, their own culture, full of life, beautiful as described in chapter 2, the Harvest Festival. The celebration is beautiful. The family, the culture, the love, the artistry, even with their challenges, they don't even have wars with each other. Yes, they have conflict, but they don't have wars. So it's interesting to BLisB as she observes her parents, because her father is a warrior. That is his role in the village. Her father, her uncle, and the other warriors, the young boys watch them as they train, learn how to fight, to wrestle, to fight, to have weapons. But to BLisB, it's like, why do y'all have weapons? There are no wars. People argue, but, she never understood that really. But nevertheless, because of the traditions that are passed down, the men, the warriors, learn how to wrestle, to fight, to protect, just in case, right? But during the Harvest Festival, something interesting happens with her mom. We find out that her mom is also a warrior. Her mom, her aunties are part of the secret society of women who don their masks during harvest and share a bit of that secret society warriorship through dance. And BLisB's mom, gives her that look while she's dancing during the thing. Underneath her mask, BLisB catches a wink at her mother's eye, and she knows it's her mom because they have the same oil scent on them. It's I like how the author depicts what a harvest festival is like, undisturbed by the outside world and outside influences. And life is good. But then here comes the witch. Now she's a part of their community, but she lives on the outskirts of the village, and you can tell it's by choice. And the only time she's come prior to this harvest festival was when BLisB was born 12 years ago. 12 years is a long time. But there she is, disturbing the harvest festival. And it's scary. It's scary to the point, like, why did she stop everything? Why did she disturb our peace? The elders, everybody knows it gotta be something, because it's been 12 years. So let's see why the witch came. Chapter 3, The Witch. Abeni waited for the odd standoff between her village and the old woman to end, but the two only continued to stare, each seeming to wait for the other to blink. She thought she might yell if no one spoke soon, but just as she had begun the face-off, the old woman ended it. Her eyes gave one last sweep across the village before making a loud, "Hmm." Without another word, she hiked up her long dress and started walking forward. No one got in her way, everyone moving quickly to let her pass. It wasn't hard to tell where she was going because her eyes were fixed on the large, round building ahead, the great meeting house, where the grown-ups and leaders of the village met to discuss important things. The old woman stalked right towards it, never slowing, and walked inside to disappear from sight. For a long moment, everyone stood staring, uncertain what to do. The chief elder of the village was the first to move. A small man, he was wrapped in red and gold cloth with a loop of ivory and blue stones on his balding head. The old woman hadn't said a word to him or even looked at him, and he was a chief. But he was hurrying now, moving as fast as his legs could take him. The chief elder's attendant, a tall younger man named Abo, scurried behind. A low murmuring picked up among the crowd as people began coming out of their masks, revealing lots of worried faces. They all moved towards the meeting house, telling older children to head home and to look after their siblings. Abeni watched it all in confusion. What was happening? Was Harvest Festival over? And what was that old woman doing here anyway? She looked to Fomi, who shrugged and shook her head. Soon the village's streets were cleared of grown-ups, leaving the children standing about. The more obedient scooped up the younger ones, heading back to their homes. Abeni and Fomi stayed. So did some other children their age, even that silly Sowoke. Ikwolo was there too, talking with a group of boys. At catching sight of Abeni, he hurried over, the other boys in tow. She moved to meet him, and everyone followed. The small group quickly convened, all speaking at once. "The witch! Here on Harvest Festival. She looks angry. Do you think she's come to dance?" "Witches don't dance." "Witches dance all the time." "Have you ever seen a witch dance?" "Abeni, do you know anything about the witch?" Abeni blinked at the question from an older boy. "What? No, why would I?" "You're a little rain bringer," a girl said. "Everyone knows about you and the witch." There was quiet, as every eye fell on her, waiting. Abeni shifted uncomfortably. "I wasn't born then. We never met." Someone else started to comment, but Ikwolo broke in. "If she says she doesn't know, she doesn't know. This isn't getting us anywhere." Abeni gave him a thankful smile. She looked to the meeting house. The grown-ups who couldn't fit inside stood by the open door, pressed together and listening. "I wonder what they're saying in there," she asked aloud, and everyone turned to the meeting house. "Wish we could find out." "Don't be ridiculous," a boy said. "Only grown-ups are allowed in there." "Not so ridiculous," Ikwolo mused. "I know a place where we can listen." The other boy gasped. "We'd get in so much trouble if we were caught." Ikwolo winked at Abeni, and she bit her lip to hide the silly grin on her face. "Better not get caught then." In a swift turn, he was gone, leaving the small group to either stand or catch up. Abeni was already running after him, pulling Fomi along. Most of the others did the same. They skirted between some homes, approaching the meeting house from the back, where there was no door. A large tree grew up against its mud brick wall, towering just over the bushy straw roof. Up there, Equola pointed. We get on the roof, and there's a place where you can see in. How do you know? Another boy asked doubtfully. Equola smiled. Last time it rained, it leaked from there. My brothers are supposed to fix it, but haven't yet. With that, he grabbed hold of the tree and began climbing. 3 other boys soon followed. When they reached the roof, they scrambled atop, inching forward flat on their bellies to look down. There was a brief pause before Equolo turned back to them and nodded. That was all Albany was waiting for. She was making towards the tree eagerly with Foamy when one of the boys, Don Way, looked down and shook his head. This is for men, he declared. Girls should wait. Down there. Then what are you doing up there, you big stork? Foamy fumed. Don Way looked ready to shout back, but Equolo silenced him, motioning them up. Albany had grabbed hold of the tree when someone else tugged her arm. So okay, she'd almost forgotten the girl was there. Are you really climbing that tree? Like some silly boy, she scolded. I sure am, Albany retorted, pulling her arm away. What's wrong? Scared? Sowoke frowned. Don't be childish. I'm supposed to be setting a good example for you two. Besides, I don't want to mess up my dress. Father brought it all the way from Albany didn't hear the rest because she was already scaling the tree. Who had time to listen to that? When she reached the roof, she waited to help Foamy up, and the 2 of them crawled forward on their bellies to join the 4 boys. There was some elbowing to get Donway to make room, but they found a comfortable spot. Somehow, she ended up right next to Equolo and followed his gaze down. The hole in the straw roof was just big enough to make out the entire inside of the meeting house. The round room was crowded. It hardly seemed possible that the entire village, all the grown-ups anyway, could fit in there at once. The only open space was near the front. And there, on a stool, sat the chief elder, holding a long wooden staff crowned by a golden bird. Beside him stood the chief attendant, Abo, in yellow robes with a matching cap like a floppy cone. Between them and everyone else was the old woman. She sat on a stool too small for her tall body. As she spoke, Albany leaning closer. You were warned, she was saying. All of you were warned to leave this place. 3 times I gave warning. Once to your leader, once to your holy men, then again to all of you in your dreams. She glared out at the crowd. But none of you listened. You are all still here. There was another lengthy silence, the grown-ups reminding Albany of scolded children. What warning could that witch be talking about? Foamy whispered. In dreams? Albany shook her head. She'd never heard any warning. All I dreamed of last night was some stupid song, Donway muttered. Foamy jerked her head at him. For once, she wasn't on the verge of scolding. I think I dreamt about a song last night, she said. The 2 were staring at each other in confusion when Equolo broke in. I had a dream about a song, too. He turned to the other boys. How about you? They nodded quickly, their eyes going wide. Ikwolo's questioning gaze fell on Abeni. I think so, she answered. She'd had strange dreams last night, but until now had forgotten about the song, though I can't remember how it went. I don't either, Ikwolo frowned. I couldn't even sing it back to you. Abeni nodded. It was more like having a memory of a song than the song itself. I remember it being beautiful, Fomi murmured. The most beautiful thing I'd ever heard. It made me feel warm and happy, and that if I didn't stay close to it, I'd be cold and alone forever. The others all nodded as if trying to conjure the song back up. Abeni did too, remembering the warmth that had filled her up and how badly she'd wanted to follow it. It felt real, she said, like the song was playing for someone else. Where was that place, Fomi asked. It didn't feel like our village. No, Ikwolo agreed. It felt and looked different, like some place far away. What about the crying woman? Danwei asked uncertainly. His eyes darted between them. Did any of you hear that too? Ikwolo nodded slowly. Something about children. Lost children. He has taken the children, Abeni said. Taken them from me, the children of night. She finished to find everyone staring at her. She'd completely forgot about the crying voice, but now she could hear it clearly, echoing in her head. Whoever she was, Fomi whispered, she sounded so sad, as if she'd lost the most precious thing in the world. What's happening? Danwei asked, his face filled with worry and fear. How can we all have the same dream about a place we've never been? Do you think the witch... But he was shushed by Fomi as the grown-ups below started up again. It was the chief elder who broke the quiet. Asha, he began, putting on a smile that looked painted on. So that was her name, Abeni thought. Asha. We listened to your warnings and discussed it among ourselves with great seriousness. We are always grateful for your wisdom. But not now, the old woman cut in. You come to me when your crops die, when there is sickness you cannot heal, when there is some question to be answered or thing that you need, yet when I give you this warning, you ignore it. What would you have us do? The chief elder asked, frustrated. You ask us to abandon our village? We have held this land for generations. Our ancestors founded this village. The mother and father of my mother and father and those that came before them. The old woman leaned forward, seeming to tower over everyone. Do you forget who I am? I knew you before there was a hint of white on your head. I knew your mother and father, their mother and father, and those before them. I was here when this village was founded, and in all that time, your ancestors knew well to follow my wisdom. I do not give idle warnings. Abeni and Fomi exchanged startled glances. How old exactly was she? The old woman sat back, her anger dying away. A long sigh passed through her lips, and Abeni couldn't help but think she just looked tired. When she spoke again, her voice was calm but filled with the weariness on her face. None of you know the happenings outside this forest. How can you? When I have protected you for so long, the world is not at peace. There is war and all the troubles and misery that war brings. I have hidden you away from these dangers, but I can do so no longer. The chief elder frowned, but his attendant spoke for him. All this talk of troubles in the larger world, Abo said. He gave a quick laugh that didn't sound real. What do we care for such happenings? We are a small village. We deal little with those beyond this forest. Their concerns are not ours. The old woman gave the attendant such a grim look that his smile crept away. If only it were so, she said. The dangers of the larger world are closer than all of you think. In fact, the danger is here, now. At her words, there was a clap of thunder so loud and sudden it shook the room. On the rooftop, the group of children jumped at the booming. The old woman turned her eyes upward as if she could see right through to the sky above. Abeni followed her gaze. There was a storm brewing. Puffy, dark clouds were beginning to spread across the blue sky, swallowing up the sun. In a moment, the day was plunged into darkness. Abeni shivered as a strong wind picked up. It whipped against her, howling through the village. She had seen storms before. They came with smells like stone and earth. This one had no smell. It didn't even have rain. There were just clouds, thick and dark, like smoke. They rumbled noisily, giving off flashes of white lightning. And from somewhere inside, there was a shadow. Abeni gasped at the sight. It wasn't easy to make out, but she could see it if she tried hard enough. An unnatural black in the already dark sky. It had wings, like some giant bird or bat, and where it passed, the clouds grew darker still, and a chilling cold crept over her. She shivered as she watched the shadow sweep across the sky before disappearing again. "Did you see that?" she stammered. Iquolo followed her gaze. "See what?" "The shadow. It was just there." Iquolo squinted but shook his head. "All I see is a storm," Fomi said. Abeni wanted to tell them they were wrong, that there was something out there in the clouds, something that was circling their village, watching them. But the others had turned their attention back to the meeting house. The grown-ups were shouting and speaking all at once, pleading with the old woman. They were afraid, Abeni realized in shock. "I can no longer protect you," the older woman yelled back. The strength of her voice brought quiet, and she returned calm. "The day is too late. I've only come for what is owed me. I have watched over this village, never demanding as much as even a kernel of grain. All I've ever asked is that on the day of my choosing, I receive one of your children in payment, and I have come to collect." On the rooftop, Abeni and the others all inhaled sharply. There was stunned silence from the grown-ups at the request. No one seemed to know how to respond. It was the chief elder who finally spoke. His face was furious as he rose to his feet, glaring at the old woman. "You want payment?" he asked, voice trembling in anger. "You abandon us in our time of need? You leave us to ruin, and you expect us to hand over our children?" "One child," the old woman corrected. Lifting a finger. "One child, and no more." "You would not be given one goat," the chief elder roared, striking the ground hard with his staff. We will not give you one fowl, not one yam, not a single speck of grain. He paused to catch his breath. You witch. The old woman said nothing, her face as calm and undisturbed as water. The chief elder is right, Abo added, shooting to his feet. He eyed the old woman sourly. We will not hand over any child to you. We don't need your feeble witch ways. We can protect ourselves. Turning, he called to Abeni's father. Akanyo, gather the warriors to defend the village. Abeni looked to her father, who had stood quietly all this time. Like everyone else, he was still dressed for the festival, his mask in hand. He looked past Abo to the chief elder. Only when the older man nodded did he unfold his arms and call to his brother. Her uncle Tawayo's voice came loud, barking orders. Your swords, your spears and shields, gather them now. Men snapped to attention, rushing from the meeting house to gather weapons. The room erupted into new excitement as talk turned to preparing for war. Abeni watched her mother grab hold of her father before he could leave. The two of them were speaking, but she couldn't make out anything in all the noise and confusion. The two embraced tightly. Then, turning abruptly, her father left, her uncle and the warriors following. Atop the roof, Abeni found she was the only one still lying down. Everyone around her had become as frantic as the people below. The boys were all scrambling down the tree, crying out that the village was at war. Even Iquolo flashed an excited smile at her before leaving. Abeni stared at them all, confounded. War? War with who? Why would anyone want to fight her little village? And what was all that about the grown-ups agreeing to give that old woman one of their children? She put out a hand to Fomi, who was preparing to go. What are you doing? Going home, her friend said. You should too. There's going to be a war. Abeni watched Fomi make her way down the tree and then turned to look out across the darkened village. People were running in every direction, going into houses and out of them again and shouting at each other. I just don't understand, she muttered. Turning back to the meeting house, she looked down. The room had emptied except for two figures. The old woman, who remained seated on her stool, her face unchanged despite all the commotion. The other person stood in the doorway, looking out and up at the stormy sky. When that person turned around, Abeni gasped. It was her mother. She hurried to the old woman, and the two began speaking, saying things that couldn't be heard. Then, to Abeni's surprise, her mother fell to her knees. Now she spoke loud enough so that bits and pieces filtered up to the rooftop. We need your protection. The old woman shook her head. No longer able. Only come for what is due. My son, my daughter. Once more the old woman shook her head. Only one. Choose one. Abeni's heart beat fast as she watched the exchange. What was happening? Her mother's face looked anguished, her eyes filled with tears. She'd never known anything could so sadden her mother, and it frightened her. A long roll of thunder sounded before Yayawi finally answered. Abeni, she choked back a sob. Let it be my Abeni. The old woman looked at Abeni's mother hard for a moment. Then, placing a hand on her shoulder, she gave a deep nod. Abeni lay on the roof stunned. It felt like someone had punched her in the stomach. Had her mother just given her to this old woman? A woman people called a witch? How could this be happening? Her head swam, trying to make sense of the insensible. Her mother stood up, turning and fleeing from the meeting house. Abeni was still reeling in confusion when the old woman suddenly looked up, dark eyes fixed directly on her. She pulled away quickly, rolling onto her back out of sight. Somewhere out in the village, she could hear her mother calling her name, searching for her, but she didn't answer. She wouldn't just be given away to this old woman. She would find her father, or maybe her aunt. No, she would go and stay with Fomi. That's it. She'd hide there until she could figure this out. And then the chanting began. Iya-ya, ayo-yo, iya-ya, ayo-yo. The hair on Abeni's arms stood up on end. It sounded like many voices speaking at once, saying words she didn't understand. It came not from any one place, but from all around, from the forest itself. Everyone else heard it too. All through the village, people stopped what they were doing and went quiet to listen. The chanting grew louder, closer. Abeni came to her feet, staring out. From atop the roof, she could see what others could not. All around their village, a thick gloom was forming on the ground. Dark like the clouds above, it crept forward like a living thing, hiding the forest from view and surrounding the village on all sides. She shivered. She'd never seen mist behave like that before, as unnatural as this storm. The terrible chanting came from inside it, pounding in her ears like a drum. People were beginning to take notice of the encroaching darkness. They pointed and clutched each other while the warriors came forward, led by her father and uncle. They stood, facing the gloom, spears at the ready. Then, quite abruptly, it all stopped. Abeni listened close. The chanting had ended, leaving a terrible quiet. The gloom had stopped as well. It sat there on the edge of the village, a great hulking thing that churned. Like everyone else, she stood waiting, heart pounding and breath held, knowing and feeling that something else was going to happen. Nightmares formed in her head, things with endless arms and great big mouths that would come from that darkness to swallow them up. So she was a little surprised when what stepped out of the gloom was no monster at all, but a woman. So now we know why the community looks at the old woman as much more than just an old woman. She spoke to the chief elder as if he was a child. This man's probably like 80, 90 years old, but she's talking to him like, I know your mother and father, or I knew your mother and father. I knew your mother and father's mother and father. I knew their parents and their parents' parents. She's been there since the founding of the village. So she's not just some old woman. Also because we hear about how the elders do interact with the woman. Although she lives on the outskirts, deep in the forest, deep in the bush, when things get overwhelming for even the elders to deal with, they go to her and they ask her for her help. So I get why she's like, you come to me knowing that I have such knowledge and wisdom of the beginning of us. But when I warn you, you ignore it. I also understand why the chief elder and everybody else was like, this is our land, leave and go where? Because they couldn't see the danger. They didn't know exactly what it was. But sometimes you don't gotta know. You gotta trust what has been working for all these years. That old woman been there since their parents. But it is what it is. So the old woman came for the thing that she's been promised, which was a child. And that's, wow, damn. As much as this community loves their children, loves their family, love each other, no, they ain't giving you one of their kids. What are you talking about? One of their children. Are you crazy? But the old woman's face didn't change. Like, she was super powerful. Not super powerful, just, yeah, powerful. And her power was like in her. She was confident because she was who she is for so long. That type of confidence that's been over all the time of however long her life has been, it deserves respect. And you could tell Abeni's mother respects the old woman. She's the only one that stayed behind. First, she spoke with her husband, and you could tell she spoke with her husband about, listen, I'm going to go to the old woman, and I'm going to have a talk with her, da-da-da-da. And it was beautiful for Abeni to see that between her parents. But it's probably not surprising because she's used to a community like that. And it's scary. The description of the mist as unnaturally black. Of course, there's natural black, which is one of the most beautiful things in the world. Deep, dark, natural black. But the unnatural black of something that's coming to do unspeakable evil, that mist, that shadow that's coming over their forest, oof, it's about to be some mess. And then for a woman to step out of the gloom, what kind of woman is this? Ugh. Until next time, I'm going to end here. Chapter 4, just to give you an idea of what's coming up. Chapter 4 is all about the storm women. My goodness. Until next time, peace.